Good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors, and you are on the channel for Catalyzing the Future. We have a series of upcoming events we'll tell you about at the end of the broadcast today. But today, we're going to be talking about how designing user experiences for online communities and digital workplaces is different than designing for any kind of other online websites or user interfaces for applications. And my guest, Ash Dzick, we'll be talking about how building immersive and usable experiences can improve productivity, morale, engagement, and loyalty for your organization and brand. All of this on today's episode of Building Resilient Communities Online. Welcome back to Catalyzing the Future, our newest series, which is called Building Resilient Online Communities. Why resiliency? Well, since the crises of 2020, the mission of Catalyzing the Future has been to challenge conventional thinking and build sustainable futures. And in this series, we ask what resilience is and means, and how it can be applied to the online spaces that we build to create trust and better experiences for everybody. Why online communities? Well, it's my area of specialization. And with more emphasis on remote work, greater need to collaborate globally, online communities are really poised to take on a much greater role in the near future for so many organizations, from the smallest startups to the largest global companies. So this series explores the role of online communities from a variety of perspectives, not just that of community managers, but from all kinds of different disciplines. So before we get started with my guest today, please remember to like this video and subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, hit the bell so that you get notifications of any of our upcoming items in the series. You'll hear not only about the shows from this series, but also the other offerings we have coming up for the Catalyzing the Future events this year. My guest today is Ash Dzick, who's the Director of User Experience at Management Research Services and lecturer at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. Ash is passionate about building immersive and usable experiences, both traditionally and in emerging technologies, such as the ones we're talking about today. Welcome, Ash. It is so good to see you.
Thanks, Todd. It's good to see you again.
You know, we had a chance to work together about a year and a half ago on a couple of digital workplace projects, and I'm eager to dig in and have some conversations about that without naming any names. But why don't we start out by, if you could maybe give us a little bit of a background about who you are and how you got into user experience work. What is your origin story?
Yeah. So I started off as a software engineer, actually. So doing VB6, very, very back end. And it was very hard for me personally to connect the value there to the end user. I know some people crush it in software development. I needed to be a little bit closer to be able to fully comprehend the impact. So I moved sort of organically into front-end development and then into user experience about 10 years ago. So why would that matter to me? I think one of the most rewarding parts about user experience is the ability to directly see or hear the impact that you've made on your audience. So in the case of the projects we were working on, being able to do actual research with people across several languages and several countries, being able to do those workshops with them, being able to really empower their own ideas and not just make it sort of a top-down, but really a collaborative building of the community.
I really like that emphasis on collaboration and conversation. So important with communities. I would say a critical element of communities. Equally important with websites and sort of understanding the perspective of people that are going to come and use it, but particularly in these places where conversations happen online, it always seemed to me that that's a little bit of a different animal in the design process.
Yeah, so online communities are interesting because traditionally it's a captive audience, especially if you're designing it for an organization. And sometimes because it is a captive audience and they have to use their internal tools or communities, people don't give it the attention, the thought process of user experience that they should, because these people have to use the tool. So why bother? And I think that attitude is changing when people realize the impact on things like retention and just general worker happiness. Like using tools that are not pleasant, it makes your whole job feel unpleasant. It makes you feel underappreciated and undervalued. So, kind of the other interesting part of designing for an online community is that tools really dictate the experience. If you're designing an online community using a custom built intranet or SharePoint or LoomApps or any of the other tools, you sort of have to lean into it and stop fighting, SharePoint or whatever else. So then that way you can fully embrace the ecosystem you sort of landed in. Otherwise, it just feels like there's a lot of friction.
I really like that flexible mindset that you described there, because my approach to communities has always been thinking about it's based on the organization's technology investment, what they've had, what they're willing to invest in. Like maybe it's a Microsoft centric organization, and if so, we're probably looking at some kind of combination of SharePoint and Teams for that experience. If it's a Google based platform, well, we don't know. It could be anything. It could be integrating with. So you mentioned LoomApps. That's a great platform. There's plenty of others that could be integrated with the Google tool set. And it feels like, especially in those digital workplace environments, the internal community, those things have to touch a lot of other systems. And I know that's something we ran into a bit with a couple of the projects that you and I worked on together a little while ago.
Yeah, so again, I think it's just sort of embracing the tool set and understanding. I remember when the second project we were on for the manufacturing client, I was guilty of this, where I didn't quite understand the tool they were on. It was still fairly new to me. And so I designed what I thought was a super cool experience, only to realize that we'd have to sort of shoehorn it in. So really understanding, to your point, the tool sets, the mindsets, and not looking to, sometimes it's not designing a world-class experience and with all the bells and whistles. It's facilitating what's going to be the easiest and the most usable and the most readable for that specific audience.
It made me smile. When I started working in online communities, I was doing a lot of work in the Jive platform, which is no longer, but it was a great platform. It could do an awful lot, and at the time, it even wasn't like a software as a service at that time. So you could really hack the heck out of it and make it do a lot of different things. And I got in over my skis on an early project where I was working with a UI UX designer who built this incredibly ornate experience based on what the client was asking for, what they said they wanted, and what they needed. But one of the other members on the team said, "Oh, dude, you know what? This is not going to work. There's no way that the platform is going to do these things. Or we could do it, but as a developer once reminded me, you can do everything, but you wouldn't want to do everything. Like all things can be developed, but the cost could be just astronomical to build something like that." So there's a partnership that's got to happen between sort of like what are the capabilities of that software versus what's the optimal experience that we're trying to build.
Right. And so I think with an online community, because it's pretty rare that somebody decides they're going to build their own from scratch and with a brand new intranet and everything, which I wouldn't encourage anyway. But yeah,
right?
It does. I think the biggest difference then in sort of traditional software as a service or websites versus specific UX for online communities is really understanding that tool set and embracing it. And I know personally that was a little bit of a hard change, because some of these tool sets, it feels like, oh, this looks not necessarily old, but I'm going to pick on SharePoint here. SharePoint is not always the most popular. I think they've done a lot lately, especially with Teams and OneDrive, to really come to a more modern look and feel. But for a while, it's like, I just want to customize all of this.
Yeah. So some of the user experiences for the platforms that have been out there for quite some time look a little long in the tooth. They're not what do we call a contemporary design aesthetic, but they're usable in some cases. Right. Like they're. I mean, I always still marvel that the idea of a discussion forum is still an active design concept that's out there, that's still used by some really cool platforms like Discourse and Vanilla are both essentially discussion forums at their core, and they're still popular highly used, kinds of applications. So I guess, as you said, you've got to sort of embrace whatever the metaphor is of that particular design experience that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, discussion forums are a great one. I remember, being on IRC and then later AOL chat, but sometimes it's okay to embrace a mature concept. So you think about like if you've got text that's blue and underlined, I'm going to think it's a link and I'm going to click on it without having to really do any additional cognitive processing. By leaning on some of those mature concepts, people don't have to reimagine your website or your experience or whatever you're designing. You're reducing that cognitive load. Thinking is very cognitively expensive. About 20 to 25% of the calories that you use every day is just on thinking, which is why our brain tries to go into autopilot and sniffs out things like links or, hey, I know what this looks like. It's a discussion forum. I've used these before. I can rely on my previous experience. I don't have to rethink this.
Right. Just had a quick shout out from my friend John Ernst over at Connector. Good morning. Interesting topic. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks for tuning in, John. It's good to see you. Appreciate you coming around. I bet you didn't know we had live comments.
I didn't. That was fun.
Yeah. So if someone is thinking about building an online community for their organization, whether it's internal for their employees or whether they're trying to connect with customers or prospects or some kind of stakeholder or whatever, as a designer, what do you feel like it's important that they hold in their brains that's different than maybe kind of like a marketing website or other kinds of experiences? How should they change their mindset as they're thinking about this design process?
Yeah, so I think a big one is to be thinking about leveraging their data and sort of spending that time wisely, especially online communities. It's internal, so there's not that external client. So sometimes, monetary isn't as big of an issue, but time is always limited. And so thinking about what are going to be the biggest impacts, the best ways to start this community. Because if you have communities that are sort of languishing for 3, 6, 9 months as a user, you come in and you just see nothing here. And I don't want to be participating. I don't want to be the first one to start this. So really sort of reducing that barrier to entry can be really helpful, whether that's seeding questions or getting a couple active members ahead of time. If you do use a lot of these platforms, you also can actually export your analytics. So that can be helpful too. You can look for where and how people are engaging. And then at that point, you can decide okay, everybody's engaging in polls. Do I want to spend more time on these other things to get them to engage with it? Or do I just want to lean into it and we're just going to do polls every day? Different options there.
Right. Absolutely. So the theme of this discussion series is about building resilient online communities. And so resiliency, it's something that's a theme that's come up in a lot of the Catalyzing the Future events from last year and before. Something we're always sort of actively questioning. And so resiliency has become a little bit of a marketing buzzword. So I'm naturally a little bit skeptical of that in its use, but I consciously put it in the title because I think there is something to building resiliency in organizations, especially at times when we've got supply chains that are so fragile. Huge ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal.
The Ever Given.
Right, right. What can be done from a design perspective in your thinking to ensure the resiliency of these sorts of collaborative, conversation-driven kinds of platforms? What does that mean to you? Or you can reject the premise if you wish. I mean, there's no sacred cows here. I'd really love to hear your candid thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind. The first one is that I've already talked a little bit about, but I'll put a name to the idea, and that's the aesthetic usability effect. And that is that we actually perceive things that are more aesthetically pleasing as more usable. So if I am coming into something and, it's got a very consistent look and feel, it's, easy to interact with, I understand sort of the color template, we cognitively are more drawn to that versus something that maybe feels disjointed or just doesn't, looks sloppy. Apart from that, though, I think, again, lowering that barrier to entry for, everyone. And so that means thinking about things like language guidelines, plain language guidelines are really key. Making sure that people can communicate in a way that's effective. How can you start thinking about things like color contrast and inclusion, and making sure that when you are designing this resilient community, you're including the entire community. So, how do you get somebody to participate when they're blind and have to use a screen reader? A lot of that is a tool limitation, but at least thinking about that can be really, really key to making sure you build up a resilient audience for your entire user base.
There were so many good things that you said in there that I'm sure I missed a couple of them. So I love the idea of inclusivity as building resilience, because the more diverse and the group that we are able to engage with, the stronger our business or organization is likely to become. I'm interpolating a little bit from what you're saying there. Also, the idea of just design aesthetic, like a highly usable, appealing sort of site. It looks healthy. That's going to have a psychological impact on us.
Right.
In thinking about, wow, this looks like a pretty healthy, neat-looking place. I want to be a part of this experience. And then the ease of use, getting into that space too. Like, I didn't want to just let those sort of wash by. Those were all really insightful points. I appreciate that. So it looks like we had a couple of comments that were shown up here. I just wanted to kind of pop back in here. John with Connector is asking what kind of common metrics might be tracked in a community to understand if it's demonstrating the qualities of resilience. That's a great question. Why don't we just take that one to begin with? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so some of that will depend on the tool, but in general, you'll see things like page visits, you'll see things like number of new users versus returning users. And one of my favorites is actually the average time on site or community. Sometimes you get it just overall. Some of the newer platforms will actually tell you average time per community specifically if you've set up those online communities, and that can be really key. Okay, people spend on average 5 seconds in this community. They're not giving a value. Fewer people might be going to this other community, but they're spending 3 minutes on it. There's clearly more interaction going on. And then taking it a step further and thinking about just general interactions. What are people clicking on? What polls are people responding to? What discussion posts are getting the most comments? Some of that you can actually export and use in a system like Tableau or Power BI. Some of them you just kind of have to look through, and then other tools have their own built-in data suite, which is also really nice to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then John, I have one more question for us. What can you learn from the metrics that inform change or release new features or even internal initiatives?
Yeah, so another great question. So as far as informing change, it really comes down to what are you trying to change? So I'll go back to my previous example. Let's say I do have two communities. One is a community of 2,000 where people spend 5 seconds on it, and the second one is a community of 200 where people spend 3 minutes on it. Sometimes those are just disparate. One might just be an overall news, and then the other one might be my specific department. But let's say they're similar. Okay, well, why are they different? Can I do any sort of treatments to one versus the other? How can I start to influence these numbers? So I really like to do things, even just informal A/B testing. Okay, I try something on 2 different communities and I see which one engages better. That works really well when you've got communities that are similar. So similar departments, let's say you've got an R&D department and a marketing department, and you're going to do it for their online communities. That doesn't work as well when you're doing it for, let's say, everybody, general company news, and the small team. So you got to make sure that your experiments are, sort of equally placed. Otherwise, internal initiatives, I'm thinking just in general, any ability to share or show any information around those, it can be key to see where and what people are interacting with. I remember when we were working on our second project together, we were thinking about the idea of news, and so specifically important information. And do we only place it once? How many times do we need to show somebody this for them to actually pay attention? So we had this big widget on the home page, but then also should we, thread this through sub communities or department pages? How many times do we need to show somebody something important for that to actually stick? Surprisingly, it's more than one.
Right. And sometimes, because we're dealing with a lot of different kinds of audiences and constituencies within an organization, different groups need to see different information at different times to make good decisions. It's all about good situational awareness so you can do your job in the ways that you need to.
Right.
And one of the ways that I think that we saw when we were working together on the two projects that we had was that how are we going to make sure that people have that information in a timely way so that they can make good decisions and so that they don't have to log into a bunch of other systems to get at that information. So like being able to surface that data or that news or those streams in the place where they're working, and they don't have to log into someplace else. And it's that usability friction thing that you had brought up a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the huge benefits of an online community and aggregation of some sort of collaborative hub is that you can, even if it's just previews and they still have to log in elsewhere, you're still at least showing them what's coming up, what's available, versus having to check 4 or 5 different sites. And that's actually pretty common in large organizations to have, different departments having different, pages that they've spun up. Here's a Google page, here's a SharePoint page, and then it's all emailed to me, so I never check any of them. You want something a little more collaborative and less static, because again, reducing that friction is going to get people involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, so with external communities, not within a digital workplace, within an organization, sort of thinking about building a branded community, or maybe an open community of practice, or even like a fan community or something like that. One of the design considerations that I've seen come up again is sort of ensuring that the conversations are elevated and higher up on the page. Are there any kinds of other tactics you can think of that might be useful to somebody designing sort of for engaging with external stakeholders or prospects or groups?
Yeah, great question. So I think when you mentioned branding, that more so external is going to be important, and sort of leaning into that without overwhelming. Sometimes I've seen, external communities where every single question is very clearly, just a thinly veiled marketing ad.
Buy our product, right?
What's the best thing you like about our product? So
it becomes an ad for Ginsu knives, if you remember those from back.
Yes. So I'm thinking to an online community I'm actually in around a very specific kind of ramen. But this company does a lot of challenges. They encourage pictures, they do competitions, and just thinking of different ways to get people involved. Because discussion threads are great, but humans are pretty visual. Anytime you can get that community participation of these really, candid, real shots, not just this perfectly placed picture of something, that really builds that sense of community, because you see somebody else's, in this case, kind of sloppily put together ramen, and you think, hey, I can make that. I can't make the thing that's in the super polished picture, but I can make this other one, and I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna send a picture too.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I do like that thought. I always sort of try to think about what are the future of these platforms tends to look like. And so some of the stuff I've been thinking about lately, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. I'm not trying to ambush you, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking about sort of the intersection between virtual events and online community building. And so I've seen some platforms that I've worked with and been in, like Teu. I think they just renamed themselves Roomkey. It's basically like an old version of Second Life, where you pop in and you've got a little conference room or conference stage, and people can kind of talk to each other, but it's all virtualized avatars that are in the space. I've seen other kinds of events where they're largely Zoom driven, where you've got sort of the talking heads, the Brady Bunch effect, that's out there. But I feel like online communities have traditionally been these asynchronous text-based conversations back and forth. And so you're bringing up sort of like adding photos or video to that experience. It has some potentially powerful effects. I guess I'm asking if you could sort of deliver, irrespective of platform, like what would something like that look like if you had your druthers as the designer to kind of create something?
Yeah, great question. So I think the avatars and little ability to do virtual are super cool, but I don't know if how much value it's delivering. I apologize if you can hear the dog. He just woke up. So I'm thinking of Mozilla Hubs is super cool because you can actually walk around and communicate with people, and your little avatars can see each other. Some part of me thinks it's because we're just people starved. I think about the important parts of community building where I can, actually have meaningful conversations, or I can, to your point, kind of contribute asynchronously. And there's been a lot of conferences that are using a lot of technology that's been really interesting to me. So I joined one last month on a platform called Hopin. And so they had main stage, and then they had conference stages. But the thing I miss the most about the conference is, the random hallway networking. And it was super cool. Anytime you could go into this little tab that was networking, and it would be like you left the room at the conference and you ran into somebody else. And it just sort of randomly, it was like speed dating, where it just sort of randomly paired you up with people. And then when you were ready to move on to network with someone else, you just went. And so that was really nice. And that, sort of that ability to facilitate that synchronous collaboration, whether it's video or otherwise, I think is going to be a key feature moving forward, as I'm sure we have some ability of remote for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. Thank you. And yeah, so I'm always trying to kind of keep a pulse on sort of what's coming next, and we have such a proliferation of community-based platforms, or if you want to call them private social networking or enterprise, there's so many to choose from. It's often like when I'm working with customers and they're thinking about doing this and they haven't selected a platform, it's overwhelming to them.
Oh, for sure.
About like where do we start? Where do we even begin thinking about that? And I always talk to them about, well, what are the interactions that you want to create? Who are you trying to engage with? What do they need? What are they asking for? And how do we, and that's exactly what you do in sort of the interview process and talking to individuals for designing any kind of application, right?
Yeah, definitely the tool selection. That's definitely your area of expertise. I'm firmly on the overwhelmed by tools boat, but I think, kind of taking that and extrapolating a little bit, that ability to really do some of that research, to talk to people. And I like talking to end users, not just people involved in the project. Give me 10 random people that you think will use this, and I'll go talk to them. I'll see what their job is like. I'll see what challenges they currently experience and see how we could maybe facilitate collaboration or solutions. When we were on that second project, it was interesting because they're a global company. I had a couple of 5 a.m. conversations, a little rough, but great conversations, just very, very early.
Yeah, absolutely. I see we had a couple of other comments here. I want to be mindful of our time too, but here's one that's interesting, came up. Vishnu says, top members of a community prefer to see more useful data on their community landing pages, but regular members prefer a bit more cleaner pages. Is this a global trend, and how do we find a balance? That's a great question.
Yeah, for sure. So when thinking about sort of those top members, or people who come back frequently, they want those deep insights. They want to see meaningful, actionable data. If I'm coming in as a new user, or just somebody who's just kind of a regular member, it can be a little overwhelming to all of a sudden have just metrics everywhere, insights everywhere. But I would say that even like regular, power users, those top members, still like clean pages. It's just that they also like having a lot of data. Having a combination, just thinking about a clean experience for everybody, but also thinking about your information hierarchy. Do I have collapsible sections? Do I have sub pages? What information is truly going to be the most important and for everyone? And let's display that prominently. Now let's think about the secondary or supporting information, and how can I make sure that, I can either click on something or show hide or a second page or collapse or whatever it is to have that sort of assisted. So I guess to sort of put a bow on it, not showing all the information at once, but really forcing and thinking about what's my primary information to show and showing that. And then that secondary information that maybe only power users or top members care about, maybe not putting that as prominently. It might take them an extra click. You don't want it to have an extra 7 clicks, but it's okay if it's an extra, click or 2, as long as it's easily accessible and findable. It's when you hide it off somewhere else that it gets frustrating.
Absolutely. And I think about those different points in a member's journey within a community, and what I've seen in some of the other platforms that I've been involved with working on the design approach for, has been maybe even having some dismissible elements on the page. So if you are a newer user, or if you are a power user of some sort, being able to have like something you can just kind of click to dismiss, and it's recorded in your cookies or whatever, so that doesn't come back up again. And I would think that for some of those power users or top members of the community, or even like your community ambassadors, people that are a little bit more empowered, maybe even showing them different contextual information based on what their user profile happens to be. It seems like there's a lot of things we could do.
For sure. Yeah, if you have a platform that actually has the idea of user roles, so you could tag people appropriately, like this person's an admin or this person's a power user. You could show things that are just for them versus other people who might not see as much.
Oh, absolutely, that's a great question for Vishnu. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time here. It always passes by so quickly when I'm talking to really cool people like you. But if somebody is interested in following your work or getting in touch, or if there's any kind of groups or upcoming events you've got coming up, what's the best way to look you up?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm Ashley Dzick. Same thing on LinkedIn. Otherwise, I'll do a quick plug here. So I also run the Milwaukee area UX group, myself and a couple other people. So if you go to brewcityux.com, you can see our upcoming events. Our next one is April 7th. So we actually have Rob Nero from Spotify, who's going to come talk about his designer journey. And it's kind of hilariously named How Not to Get Fired as a Designer. But that should be a fun one.
That is awesome. That is really cool. But even though that's your Twitter profile, Ashley Dzick,
yes,
we shouldn't call you Ashley. You go by Ash all the time.
I go by Ash.
Very good, very good. Ash, I'm so grateful for you coming on this series and sharing your experiences and your insights with us. Really appreciate it, and absolutely wish you well with whatever's next in your adventures that you're going on to. And for those of you that were able to join us here live today, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate that. If you've got some comments that I didn't get to, in the course of the conversation today, I will jump back out into the YouTube section and try to answer those or point you guys towards some resources as well. But in the meantime, if you haven't checked it out yet, we do have an upcoming event for Catalyzing the Future that is called Rethinking Women's Leadership in Business. It is going to be fantastic. It's coming up in May. I think it's May 13th. I thought I had it up in my notes here, but I don't. But you can definitely check it out by going to catalyzingthefuture.com and registering there. It is a free event. Just all kinds of people, not from the consulting world, but actually people in corporate work environments, thinking about the role of women in leadership. And it's going to be a super energizing event. And Sai out here, who's the founder for Catalyzing the Future, myself, as an organizer, we're really happy to be supporting them and the conversations that result from that as well. So thank you for that. Ash, thank you again.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll see everybody next time. I've got a conversation coming up next week with a gentleman who works with a lot of local entrepreneurs here in Wisconsin and has been setting up the online version of his offline kinds of communities for startups and entrepreneurs. And we'll be talking a little bit about what it means to straddle those two worlds, the physical and the virtual. So with that, have a great rest of the day, everybody. And we will see you again soon on Catalyzing the Future.